The morning milk was still warm when Lucas Martin vanished from Maple Lane, Joliet, Illinois, population 30,412. June 23, 1951, arrived with a clear blue sky and the distant wail of the steel mill whistle, promising just another ordinary Midwestern day. At 4:15 p.m., Lucas's neighbor, Florence Kelly, glanced out her kitchen window and saw the 6-year-old blond boy bouncing a red ball across the lawn, while his little sister Anna giggled from behind the fence. Lucas bent down to pick up the ball, said something, then ran closer to the street where a silver-gray pickup truck sat silently in the shade of an elm tree. That was the last time anyone saw him. When the sun slipped behind the row of factories, the red ball remained in the middle of the street, and whatever happened in the next 15 minutes would haunt Joliet for more than half a century. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the latest cases. Summer 1951, Joliet, Illinois, was an industrial town still recovering from World War II. The compressors at the steel mill thundered day and night, and the narrow, elm-lined streets still held the peaceful feel of a growing middle-class suburb living the American dream. People believed in steady jobs, meatloaf dinners, and teaching their kids to be home before the streetlights came on. On the southern edge of town, in the Maple Lane neighborhood, the Martin family lived in a white-painted wooden house with a low fence and a small garden of tomatoes and wild daisies. George Martin, the 34-year-old father, worked as a laborer at Joliet Iron Works. He was tough, quiet, left the house at dawn, and returned at dusk, smelling of iron and coal smoke. His wife Evelyn stayed home with their 2 young children. Capable, meticulous, always leaving the windows open to hear the kids playing outside. 6-year-old Lucas was blond, quick, and loved collecting old toy train cars his dad brought home from the mill. He'd line them up into tracks that ran around the porch. 4-year-old Anna followed him everywhere, clutching her plastic doll and pretending to sell tickets to imaginary passengers. Their life was repetitive, calm, and simple. Radio news in the morning, whole neighborhoods spilling into front yards every afternoon, while adults chatted and kids chased each other under strings of bulb lights. No one on the block thought anything truly bad could happen in a place where everyone knew everyone else. Then, starting in early June, a few neighbors began noticing a strange man. He drove an old but clean silver-gray pickup, sometimes parked far down near the little park at the end of the street, smoking or pretending to read a newspaper. Once, the grocery store owner said she saw him standing on the curb watching the children play, then walking away when he realized he'd been spotted. No one worried too much. The town often had strangers passing through, looking for work or making deliveries to the factories. Saturday afternoon, June 23rd, sunlight slanted through the trees. The breeze carried the smell of steel and fresh-cut grass. Evelyn was hanging laundry in the backyard, the radio playing the hit song Blue Tango. Lucas was playing with Anna on the front lawn. The red ball rolled away, and he chased it all the way to the fence. A silver-gray truck pulled up across the street. The man got out, said something Anna couldn't hear clearly, bent down, and held out his hand. Lucas paused for a few seconds, then stepped closer. Anna remembered her brother turning to look toward their mother, as if asking permission, but Evelyn was still inside. The man opened the truck door. Lucas took one more step. Maybe just curious about the shiny toy train car the man was holding up in the sunlight. The door closed softly. The truck rolled away slowly and disappeared down the long street. The red ball stayed in the road, rolling a few lazy circles in the wind. When Evelyn stepped onto the porch, Lucas was gone. She called his name, thinking he'd run to a friend's house. No answer. She walked yard to yard, knocking on doors, asking everyone. Anna, trembling, could only say she saw a silver truck. George got home just after 6, heard the news, threw his cap on the ground, and tore off down the street. Neighbors grabbed flashlights. Some called Lucas's name, others searched the park. They looked until it was pitch dark, only the sound of crickets and river wind remaining. Evelyn stood under the streetlight, clutching the shirt Lucas had left on the porch chair, staring down the empty road. At 9 o'clock, when the house clock chimed, she finally went inside shaking, picked up the rotary phone, and dialed the Joliet police. "My son is gone," she said, voice breaking, only ragged breaths between sobs. On the other end, the desk officer wrote down every word, repeated the address for confirmation, then flipped the emergency switch on the board. Outside, night wind swept over dark rooftops. Streetlights flickered on the motionless elm trees. Within 20 minutes of that call, the first two Joliet PD patrol cars turned onto Maple Lane, headlights sweeping the narrow road, illuminating trees and the cluster of neighbors. Night Shift Sergeant Howard Mills stepped out with a notebook and flashlight. He spoke quickly with George Martin, who stood in the middle of the street, face streaked with sweat and dust, clothes caked in mud from hours of running. Evelyn sat on the porch steps, hugging Lucas's shirt. Anna had been carried to the neighbor's house across the street. She still couldn't speak clearly. Mills ordered everyone back, set up a perimeter around the house, and began documenting the scene. They collected a detailed description of Lucas, about 3 8 inches tall, light blonde hair, wearing a red plaid shirt, khaki shorts, and light brown sneakers. Last seen by his mother around 4:15 p.m. Police noted every detail: the red ball, the silver-gray truck, direction of travel south. Local search and rescue was called out that same night. Dogs, portable floodlights, maps of the Des Plaines River area. Teams split into 3 groups. One swept the immediate neighborhood, one covered the small park. The third followed the route toward the highway. The cold night wind blew through the trees, mixing the smell of mill oil with river dampness. The dogs picked up the scent around the Martin fence, then veered toward the park where the ground was uneven, with tree roots and tire tracks. Mills pointed. They shone lights. In the pale yellow glow they found a child's muddy sneaker, lying on its side in the grass, the left one, exactly the kind Evelyn had described. No small footprints nearby, only faint tire marks leading away. They marked it with a wooden stake, photographed it, and bagged it as evidence. The team searched until nearly midnight, but found nothing else. Inside the house, Evelyn sat motionless by the phone, while the radio broadcast an emergency bulletin about the missing boy. Minute by minute, Maple Lane fell silent. At 1 a.m., Mills expanded the search radius to 10 miles, focusing on the Des Plaines Bridge and the woods along the west bank. Additional units from Joliet Township and Lockport arrived with small boats, portable floodlights, and topographic maps. They swept every road and river trail, marking suspicious spots. At the station, the coordinator compiled every report received overnight. 4 people saw a silver-gray truck heading south on State Route 53 after 4:30 p.m. 2 others said a man stopped to ask directions near the cement plant. Notes were made, but not yet verified. By 3 a.m., the preliminary field report read, "No biological traces, no additional physical evidence beyond the single shoe. Suspected abduction." They reconstructed the timeline. 4:10. Evelyn heard the radio inside the house. 4:15. Lucas, still playing in the yard. 4:20. Anna saw the silver truck. 4:25. Truck left the neighborhood. 5 o'clock. Evelyn came outside, looking for him. The disappearance window was only 15 minutes. Mills ordered a list of every registered truck in Joliet and the surrounding industrial area. Records were still manual, so they had to wait until morning. Before leaving the scene, he sealed the park area with yellow tape and told the family not to touch any of Lucas's belongings until forensics arrived. Dawn rose gray behind the steel mill smokestacks, mist lifting off the river. George Martin hadn't moved from the spot where the shoe was found. He stared at it as if picking it up might bring his son back. The first search shift ended at 6 a.m. The brief report read, "Victim not located. Sole trace evidence child sneaker 300 feet south of Martin residence." Daylight search orders went out. 50 more volunteers, 3 additional dogs, and a small boat sweeping the Des Plaines River. Meanwhile, at Joliet PD, the missing person file for Lucas Martin was assigned case number 447M51 and officially opened on the morning of June 24, 1951. On the second morning after the disappearance was reported, the Joliet Police Department transferred the file to the Special Investigations Unit under lead detective Charles Reddick. Reddick, 42, had experience with child abductions and missing persons cases in the greater Chicago area. He was regarded as cautious, persistent, and exceptionally observant. He arrived at the scene just after sunrise, reviewed every rescue team note, and examined the area around the Martin house. Grass was still trampled. Tire tracks had been outlined in white chalk on the pavement. Reddick ordered new photographs, measurements, and documentation of the direction the tires had turned. Then he entered the Martin home, sat in the small living room, and questioned Evelyn about that afternoon. She recounted everything, voice still trembling, the timing, the radio, the red ball, the silver truck, and the vague image of the strange man Anna kept mentioning. Reddick wrote down every detail, underlining silver gray truck, no license plate recalled, white male, approx. 40. When he spoke to Anna, the little girl said she only saw the man bend down and smile, teeth bright like sunshine. That answer made Reddick pause his pen. He asked about hair color, clothing, voice. She wasn't sure, only that he spoke fast and hoarse, like someone who smokes. Reddick compiled a witness list for the 3 surrounding blocks, and with 2 officers, went door to door. They interviewed the mailman, the grocery owner, garbage truck drivers. Anyone who might have seen something unusual. A middle-aged woman at the end of the block said she'd seen the silver truck parked near the park 2 days before the disappearance. The driver sat inside for a long time, apparently watching someone. Another neighbor recalled hearing a slow-running engine, an unusual sound for a civilian truck, more like the cement plant's delivery rigs. Reddick ordered records of every truck operating around Joliet, cross-referencing paint color and size. He also checked area traffic citations from that week. Within the first 2 days they identified 12 silver gray trucks active in the Joliet industrial zone, most owned by construction material companies. Reddick demanded verification of every driver on duty between 4 and 5 p.m. on the day of the incident. 3 drivers' timelines overlapped. 1, Raymond Phelps, had unclear temporary residence records. The team went to his boarding house, but the landlord said Phelps had left the night of June 23rd and never returned. In the empty room they found only an old newspaper and an empty cigarette pack. Reddick kept both as evidence and sent them to the lab for fingerprints. At the same time, he had the police artist create a composite sketch based on Anna's and other witnesses' descriptions. The first drawing showed a man with dark hair, low forehead, small eyes, and deep wrinkles around the mouth. Copies were made, sent to surrounding departments, published in local papers, and posted at the post office. A manhunt for the silver gray truck expanded along Route 53 and Interstate 55. Patrol units were ordered to stop and check any vehicle, matching the color and style. Within 48 hours, dozens of tips poured in. Someone saw the truck near Joliet Ironworks. Another swore it turned onto a rural road south of Lockport. Reddick reviewed every report, crossing off anything that didn't match the timeline. He had a large map mounted and pinned every sighting, slowly building a possible route. The lab returned results on the cigarette pack, no fingerprint matches in records. That made Reddick suspect the perpetrator had no prior criminal history or was from outside the area. He began comparing employment records from trucking companies in Joliet and Chicago Heights, filtering for workers hired in the previous 2 months. 12 names went onto the watch list. At the Martin house, officers remained on site, setting up a temporary post in the garage and monitoring every incoming call. George Martin was shown the composite sketch. He shook his head. He'd never seen the man in the neighborhood. On the 3rd night, Reddick sat in his car outside the house, reviewing the file and double-checking witness timelines. He circled the window from 4:20 to 4:30 p.m. the 10 brief minutes when the silver gray truck appeared and vanished without a trace. It was the only gap in the entire body of testimony that no one could explain. Reddick immediately raised the case priority to suspected interstate child abduction and ordered all interim reports forwarded to the Illinois State Police for regional coordination. Before closing the file that night, he wrote a single short line in his notebook: "Find the truck, find the child." 3 days after the silver gray pickup truck was identified through the composite sketch, Chief Detective Charles Reddick decided to expand the investigation beyond Joliet. All vehicle movement data for the afternoon of June 23 was requested to be re-examined, especially toll booths and interstate routes passing through the Chicago Heights area. He worked with the Illinois Department of Transportation to obtain the list of registered trucks entering and leaving Joliet between 4 and 6 p.m., the same time frame when Lucas was last seen. Every report was printed, numbered, and cross-referenced with the existing list of 12 drivers. From the comparison, the list expanded to 23 trucks with similar characteristics: silver gray paint, small two-door cab style, mostly belonging to materials and construction hauling companies around Chicago Heights. Reddick and his partner visited every truck yard, checked logbooks, and verified each driver's route on the day of the disappearance. Some owners cooperated. Others claimed lost records or weekend closures. At the Anderson Materials Yard, they discovered a truck of the same color but with the passenger side door freshly repainted. The driver was a temporary resident named Douglas Pratt, age 38. Pratt stated he had delivered to Joliet that day but left before 4 p.m. When asked about the repaint, he said it was due to a minor scrape with a warehouse gate. Reddick ordered paint samples taken and photographs for comparison with the paint chip found near the park, then sent everything to the lab for analysis. While awaiting results, he contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation because the suspect vehicle might have crossed state lines. The FBI sent Special Agent Walter Cray to Joliet to assist. Cray, who had experience with the old Lindbergh kidnapping case, suggested mapping the entire route from Joliet to the southern edge of Illinois, marking toll stations, gas stations, and industrial areas along Route 53 and Interstate 55. FBI agents reviewed old traffic camera footage, but most was damaged or had been erased. They shifted to verifying witness statements along the route. One toll booth attendant vaguely remembered seeing a silver truck pass around 5 o'clock, driven by a man wearing a baseball cap with an empty cargo bed. Reddick noted this information, requested a redrawn route map, and determined the distance from Joliet to that toll booth was over 14 miles, corresponding to a 15-minute drive, matching the disappearance time window. However, there was no proof that truck was the one they were looking for, since hundreds of similar trucks traveled daily. On the 5th day, the paint analysis from Douglas Pratt's truck came back. No match to the scene sample. The color and chemical composition were different. Pratt was removed from the suspect list. Reddick continued eliminating another 12 trucks. The remainder could not be verified due to missing records or vehicles that had been sold. In the following nights, he and Agent Cray sat in the small office at the Joliet Police Department. Walls covered with maps, pins marking every checked truck location, red string connecting Joliet to suspected areas. After 10 days, they had a complete summary: 23 trucks verified, 18 cleared, 5 requiring deeper checks. All 5 had routes leaving Joliet toward Chicago Heights, but no driver admitted being near Maple Lane that fateful afternoon. Cray suggested a different approach, working backward from seasonal employee lists at Joliet Iron Works and suburban cement companies that often hired temporary drivers. Names with incomplete records might match the mystery man. Reddick agreed and tasked personnel with re-examining every file. That list contained many workers who had left without notice, some moving out of state, but none fully matched witness descriptions. Newspaper coverage began to cool. The community moved on to other cases. Though the FBI maintained technical support, no additional concrete data emerged. The suspect composite posted all over Joliet gradually faded under sun and rain. Reddick persisted, checking the phone each morning for tips and staring each night at the map crisscrossed with countless lines, but no endpoint. After 2 weeks, the investigation officially entered the review phase. Physical evidence was down to an unidentified tire track, non-matching paint chips, and a single shoe. The internal report concluded temporarily, no concrete evidence of a crime or suspect identity. Leads once considered vital were successively ruled out, leaving a void in the Lucas Martin case file, a void Reddick knew he could not yet fill and had nothing new to pursue in the final days of June 1951. News of Lucas Martin's disappearance quickly became the focus of Illinois state press. Starting the second Saturday after the incident, reporters swarmed Maple Lane, setting up cameras in front of the small white painted house, where Evelyn and George tried to avoid lenses by keeping doors and curtains shut. Local papers ran bold headlines: 6-year-old boy vanishes in broad daylight in Joliet, alongside the Martin family Christmas photo from the previous year. Reporters knocked on neighbors' doors, asking about family life, how the parents treated their children, and any unusual signs no one was really sure about. Evelyn had neighbors watch Anna to escape the constant camera flashes. Meanwhile, George continued working at the steel mill, but every step inside the plant drew stares. A few co-workers whispered that he seemed too calm. Some claimed they had heard him scold the boy before the disappearance. Under public pressure, police were forced to explore every possibility, including the father's potential involvement. Chief Detective Charles Reddick visited Joliet Iron Works one July morning with the time clock records. The punch card system confirmed George was at the plant throughout the afternoon shift on June 23, clocking out at exactly 5:00 p.m., nearly an hour after Lucas vanished. Still, Reddick interviewed 2 additional shift co-workers for verification. Both confirmed George never left his station and went straight home after work. The official report cleared him of involvement, but rumors spread anyway. A week later, the Daily Herald published an anonymous piece suggesting the victim may have been hidden by family for personal reasons, causing George to angrily throw the paper into the fire and disappear for the entire night. Evelyn no longer had the strength to go outside. She locked the doors, drew the curtains, and lived in silence. Police erected barricades to keep strangers from photographing and recording around the house. Self-proclaimed psychics, private detectives, and volunteer child finders knocked on the door, promising to find Lucas in exchange for reward money. Over several weeks, more than 40 sightings were reported to the police from neighboring states. Some claimed to have seen him at the Chicago bus depot, others in a Springfield park, and a few even sent unrelated children's photos. Every lead was checked and discarded, wasting time and manpower. Reddick was exhausted. The investigation team worked 12-hour days just to respond to public pressure. The press began questioning police competence, criticizing that the case was not progressing fast enough. Community pressure forced the Joliet chief of police to hold weekly press conferences repeating the same message: "We are continuing the investigation. No new evidence at this time." As summer wore on, articles became sparse, reduced to small repeated updates. By fall, there were no new developments. The search budget was cut, rescue teams withdrawn. Reddick had to combine the Lucas case with 2 other disappearances to save costs. He kept the main file, but was down to 3 assistants. In the Martin home, Lucas's photo on the wall gradually yellowed beside the neatly folded red jacket, kept in a wooden box. Evelyn lived like a shadow, sitting on the front porch steps every day until dark. George spoke less, replaced meals with alcohol, and sometimes vanished for days before quietly returning. Neighbors gradually stopped mentioning them, afraid to reopen misfortune. In December, the first snowfall blanketed Maple Lane, and the final news item about Lucas Martin was a single line: "Joliet police suspend active search, case remains open but no progress." Reddick closed the file of over 200 pages, marked it pending review, and locked it in a metal cabinet in his office. Outside, heavy snow fell, covering the missing child posters around the post office, ink running, leaving only a child's eyes staring out against the cold white. as if the boy were still waiting to be called home from the endless void of that Joliet winter. In early 1958, nearly 7 years after Lucas Martin vanished, the Joliet Police Department officially changed the case status to unresolved missing person. The words were stamped on a pale yellow cover fastened to a file now over 300 pages thick, containing statements, crime scene photos, route diagrams, and sealed bags of minor evidence. In the basement storage room, a young officer placed the file in slot 447M51 among hundreds of other unsolved cases. Items related to Lucas, the muddy shoe, paint chip, plastic bag of soil, were transferred to central storage in a wooden box, sealed with red wax. Each item was carefully labeled with dates and the signature of Chief Detective Charles Reddick, who had by then been reassigned. He was the only one who returned to the storage room on the final afternoon before handover. Standing among the metal shelves, he silently regarded the box labeled Lucas Martin. Evidence Box A, lightly touched the peeling silver paint, then signed the transfer form. Nothing more was said. The case was effectively closed without formal announcement. On Maple Lane, the Martin family home was put up for sale after months of vacancy. Evelyn could no longer bear neighbors' stares, and George had lost his mill job due to frequent absences. They decided to move south to relatives in Springfield, hoping to start over, though unable to escape the past. Before leaving, Evelyn took down Lucas's photo, wrapped it in white cloth, and packed it with a few old toys in a cardboard box. As their car left Joliet, she looked back one last time at the quiet Spring Street, rotting wooden fence, and the faded missing child poster on the utility pole. No one in town spoke much about the missing boy anymore. Newer crimes, factory accidents, and Korean War news dominated front pages. Newly assigned officers knew little of the case, only occasionally noticing Lucas Martin's name in old archives. By year's end, the missing children investigation budget was cut, and unresolved cases were quietly shelved. File 447M51 remained untouched in its metal drawer. Gathering thick dust year after year, the label lettering gradually fading. At the Joliet post office, the black and white photo of the boy's face was still pinned under yellowed glass on the bulletin board. Passers-by no longer stopped to read. Only occasionally a child would ask a parent who it was and receive the brief reply: "A kid who got lost a long time ago." When the winter of 1958 blanketed the streets in deep snow, the Lucas Martin case officially vanished from community memory. There was no memorial service, no update reports, just a cold case number in storage, replacing a name that once shook the entire town, now buried in silence, as enduring as that Joliet winter. 23 years after File 447M51 was placed in the Joliet Police Department archives in the fall of 1974, Lieutenant Tom Keller, a recently promoted young officer, was assigned to review backlogged cases for reorganization. The storage room was in the damp basement with the smell of moldy paper. Keller opened each drawer, checked labels, and cataloged unsolved cases. When he pulled the drawer marked M Series 1950s, a pale yellow file labeled Lucas Martin, Missing Child, 1951 appeared. The cover still bore the faded signature of Chief Detective Charles Reddick. Keller flipped through the first pages, handwritten reports in blue ink, crime scene diagrams, witness lists, and the final entry: case status: unresolved. A 6-year-old boy vanished in broad daylight, never solved. He lingered longer over the black and white photo of Lucas's bright yet innocent face, then decided to bring the file upstairs. Over the following weeks, Keller spent evenings reading every document. He noted inconsistencies in statements, especially descriptions of the silver truck and the unidentified stranger. Most witnesses had moved or lost contact, but the Maple Lane neighborhood map remained in the file. Keller spread the old map on his desk, marked the Martin home, the small park, and the truck's direction with red pen. He overlaid a 1974 Joliet map and saw the area had changed. Maple Lane now bordered expanded housing, new homes everywhere, the small park reduced to a parking lot. Yet the main route to the highway remained the same. Keller decided to reconstruct the suspect's possible escape route from the Martin home to State Route 53 and then Interstate 55. He drove the route, timing it. The result nearly matched the old report, about 14 minutes non-stop. That data reinforced the theory that the driver could have left Joliet before anyone noticed. Back at the station, Keller requested federal database searches, hoping something in the past 2 decades matched the description. He sent a formal request to FBI Chicago for access to child abduction cases from 1950, 1960, attaching a copy of the suspect composite. 3 weeks later the reply came, no matching subjects, and the Lucas Martin case was never entered federally because no clear interstate element had been established at the time. Keller continued at the Illinois State Archives of Unidentified Missing Persons. Records were incomplete, mostly non-digitized, many pages stained and illegible. He photocopied entries near 1951, but found no new leads. One afternoon he drove to the old neighborhood. The white Martin house still stood, windows boarded, grass knee-high. He spoke to an elderly neighbor who said the Martins left long ago and never returned. She only remembered the blond boy and the silver truck. Keller asked about Detective Reddick. She said he had retired and moved north to Wisconsin. Back at his desk, Keller stared at Lucas's photo clipped in the file. He knew reopening a case lacking any new evidence was nearly impossible, yet the feeling something had been overlooked kept him from letting go. He wrote a short report to his superior recommending the Lucas Martin file be kept in priority review status for future forensic technology. The file was recovered in plastic and placed on a separate shelf. Keller locked the storage room, but the black and white image of the boy followed him all that night, a reminder that among hundreds of forgotten cases, some names still awaited answers. In early 1975, Lieutenant Tom Keller returned to the Lucas Martin file after a few months on other duties. He decided on a more concrete step, fully reconstructing the route the silver-gray truck might have taken on the afternoon of June 23, 1951. Using old maps and Detective Reddick's reports, Keller marked key points from the Martin home, past the small park, onto Maple Lane and State Route 53. He drove the route, noting every turn, distance, and traffic light delay. After 2 days of surveying, he identified 4 plausible directions: north to Joliet Iron Works, east to the Chicago Heights industrial area, south to Lockport suburbs, and west along the Des Plaines River toward the interstate. All could exit town within 15 minutes. Keller focused on the east, Chicago Heights, because that area had the highest concentration of transport companies mentioned in the original file. He contacted the Illinois Department of Transportation for copies of truck registrations and commercial driver licenses from 1950-1956. Hundreds of names appeared, but only 12 roughly matched age, gender, and work region around Joliet in 1951. Keller compiled the list, phoned each company, asked about former employees, current residences, and status. Results: 4 deceased, 2 moved out of state, 3 lost contact, 3 still living in the Chicago area. Among them was Arnold Price, a driver once employed by Anderson Materials, the same company that owned the truck suspected in 1951. Keller visited Price at his home, an old apartment in Calumet suburbs. The man, over 60 and in poor health, completely denied involvement, saying he was hauling to Springfield that day with receipts to prove it. Keller examined the paperwork, confirmed date and cargo, but kept Price on the list because the trip lacked independent corroboration. Next, he located the other 2 drivers, James Whitley and Donald Rowe. Both insisted they never drove through Joliet in June 1951, but no longer had logbooks for verification. Keller recorded statements, copied old residency records and work contracts, and cross-checked against state hauling logs. Nothing significant matched, yet one detail stood out. Both Whitley and Rowe had briefly worked at the same Chicago Heights transport company, whose address matched the registration of Douglas Pratt's original suspect truck. Keller noted the possible connection. Perhaps the stranger was a short-term or false paper employee. He submitted a report requesting an internal review of 1950s labor records, but budget and manpower were insufficient. He continued alone in company archives, flipping through yellowed, sometimes handwritten delivery ledgers. Most records were missing or water-damaged and illegible. After nearly 3 months, Keller identified 8 silver-gray trucks regularly operating in Joliet from May to July 1951. He requested the state crime lab retest the old paint chip from evidence storage, but technicians reported the sample had degraded beyond comparison value. All physical testing was ruled out. With no forensic basis left, the reinvestigation hit a dead end. At the end of 1975, Keller wrote his final summary, complete review of 1950-1956 transport records conducted. No individual or vehicle fully matches description. Absent physical evidence, no further action possible. He submitted the report, marked the file reviewed, no new evidence, and returned it to the cabinet. As he stepped out of the storage room, flickering fluorescent lights reflected off hundreds of dusty boxes holding silent names. Lucas Martin, just one small label among countless unsolved cases, left exactly as it had been 23 years earlier. As the new century approached, the forensic field in Illinois entered a period of major transformation. In 1999, the statewide Criminal and Missing Persons DNA Database Program was officially launched, a collaboration between the Illinois State Police, the Division of Forensic Services, and the U.S. Department of Justice. All unsolved cases from the 1940s through the 1980s were reviewed to identify evidence still viable for genetic testing. Among more than 500 cases, file number 447M51, the Lucas Martin case, was flagged because of the handwritten note evidence preserved in sealed box. In early 2000, a team of Illinois state forensic technicians went down to the evidence archives in Joliet for inventory. Amid hundreds of wooden crates, they located the evidence box labeled Lucas Martin, Box A, sealed nearly half a century earlier by lead detective Reddick. The wax seal had darkened with age, and the paper tape along the edges had faded, but inside, the evidence bags wrapped in wax cloth remained intact. A child's shoe, a flake of silver paint, a sample of dried soil, and a sealed envelope containing several light-colored hairs, along with a child's toothbrush. The original lab report noted that these items had never been analyzed because DNA technology did not exist at the time. The forensic team transferred everything to the Springfield laboratory to assess the condition of the samples. Under the microscope, the hair roots still had intact follicles, and the toothbrush bristles carried tiny clusters of cells. The specialists decided to attempt DNA extraction using the new STR short tandem repeat technique, a technology that could amplify genetic sequences from extremely small amounts of material. The first hair sample was processed in a sterile environment. After 7 hours of machine runtime, the results yielded a genetic profile with 13 loci of sufficient quality for identification. This became the first genetic dataset for the Lucas Martin case, encoded as a string of numbers and uploaded to the National CODIS database. Copies were sent to the FBI for comparison against missing persons and convicted offender profiles. After 3 months, the search returned no matches. At that time, the database was still limited, mostly containing convicted offenders and identified victims' relatives, so Lucas's sample was simply stored in the missing juvenile DNA index. Nevertheless, this marked a major step forward. For the first time, a 1951 cold case had been entered into the National Genetic System. An internal state report recognized the Lucas Martin case as the oldest viable DNA sample successfully recovered. In the following years, the lab continued testing additional samples from the toothbrush for cross-verification, confirming a stable genetic profile with no degradation. A digital dataset was created and assigned the identifier IL-MIS447. During regular forensic staff meetings, technicians cited this case as a prime example of how science could breathe new hope into cold files. However, because no direct line reference samples existed, Lucas's parents had both passed away, confirming a match remained nearly impossible without new data. At the end of 2005, when the expanded CODIS version 4.0 went live, the team re-uploaded Lucas's profile and ran it against the entire national database, but still no genetic matches were found. The report sent back to Joliet contained the brief conclusion, "No match found." Case remains in cold case DNA index. The technical file and DNA sequence were printed and stored in a dedicated electronic folder. In the central archives, the original evidence box was resealed with a new code and placed on a separate shelf labeled Processed DNA Sample 2008. After all procedures were completed, the Lucas Martin case status was changed from unresolved missing person to cold case, DNA indexed, meaning it was preserved in the database but had no matching individual. When retired Detective Keller read about it in an internal industry newsletter, he sent a handwritten letter to the Springfield Forensic Lab, thanking them for resurrecting a file he had fought to protect 20 years earlier. The last line of his letter read, "Perhaps somehow that boy will be found, if not by people, then by what remains in each strand of hair." The Lucas Martin case thus remained unchanged in the data vault, becoming one of thousands of cold cases carrying the faint hope that one day the silent DNA sequence sitting in the system would find a living person carrying the same genetic code, and the story forgotten since the summer of 1951 might be reopened. In 2008, the state of Illinois established a dedicated unit called the Springfield Cold Case Task Force, an interagency investigative team responsible for reviewing unresolved cases from the mid-20th century. The team consisted of veteran detectives, forensic specialists, data engineers, and FBI advisors. Among the first cases transferred to them was File IL-Miss 447, the disappearance of Lucas Martin. The lead investigator assigned the case to Special Agent Sarah Donnelly, age 38, formerly with the Chicago Missing Persons Unit, and known for her data-driven approach. Working with her was forensic technician Miguel Reyes, who specialized in DNA sample recovery and genealogical data processing. When Sarah received the file and saw the heading Missing Child, 1951, along with the black and white photo of the blond boy, a case nearly 60 years old, she decided to make it a pilot for full digital conversion. The first task was to convert the entire physical file to electronic format. Miguel and two other engineers set up a dedicated scanning room in the archives. They opened every folder, scanned every page, including barely legible 1950s handwritten notes, along with crime scene photos, route maps, witness lists, interview transcripts, and forensic reports, all entered into ColdNet, the state's newly developed case management software. The remaining physical evidence, the shoe, paint chip, and soil sample, was 3D photographed for digital preservation. The electronic file was completed in June 2008, marking the first time the Lucas Martin case existed in fully digital form in the statewide database. During review, Sarah noticed that Lucas's DNA profile had been in CODIS since 2000, but had never produced a match. She proposed a new direction, using the rapidly developing commercial genealogical DNA technology. At that time, private companies like Family Tree DNA and 23andMe were opening public genetic databases that allowed partial sequence matching to identify distant relatives. Sarah believed that, with luck, Lucas's DNA might connect to a living relative and open leads about lineage or geographic origin. She and Miguel drafted a pilot proposal and submitted it to the Illinois Attorney General's office, requesting permission to use the victim's DNA in commercial databases while pledging full confidentiality compliance. After 2 months, the project was approved. Reyes re-extracted Lucas's original STR profile, converted it to a format compatible with genealogical software, uploaded the anonymized sample to the Springfield Lab's test server, and set up a semi-automated matching algorithm. At the same time, Sarah re-examined family information, both parents deceased, sister Anna out of contact, no direct line reference samples remaining. This made the genealogical approach the only remaining path. In the plan she wrote, "If we cannot find a suspect, at least let us find whatever connection still exists to the boy." In October 2008, Lucas's DNA data was uploaded anonymously to two major commercial databases. The systems began scanning millions of genetic profiles for partial matches. Night shift technicians monitored the screens, logging any potential hit with its geographic origin and degree of similarity. After several weeks, the first results appeared: 3 individuals with 0.4% matches, too low to establish kinship, but proof that Lucas's decades-old sample was still of sufficient quality for comparison. Sarah requested expanded parameters and deeper geographic analysis, using statistical data from neighboring states to look for regional migration patterns. Reyes generated a genetic map showing that Lucas's markers clustered with populations in the southeastern United States, suggesting relatives may have moved toward Florida or Alabama. This information was noted in the file, though not yet conclusive. It opened a new investigative direction. By year-end, the fully digitized Lucas Martin case was updated in ColdNet and flagged as a priority file. Sarah closed her annual report with the sentence, "Technology may not change the past, but it can illuminate it with a different light." The Lucas Martin file, once a dusty stack of papers in storage, was now a living dataset on the state of Illinois servers, waiting for some genetic sequence somewhere in the world to accidentally match it and shatter nearly 6 decades of silence. In early 2014, when Illinois' genealogical DNA matching system was connected to expanded commercial databases, an unusual alert appeared under potential family matches. The results showed a profile belonging to Harold Blake, residing in Jacksonville, Florida, with a genetic sequence matching 99.98% to sample IL-MIS 447, the Lucas Martin file. The alert was routed to the Springfield laboratory, where technician Miguel Reyes personally reran the entire sequence to rule out error, comparing it in parallel with the original 2000 data. Every test returned the same result, a near-perfect match between Lucas's sample and that of Harold Blake, who had submitted his DNA to a commercial site in 2013 while searching for distant relatives. Reyes immediately notified investigator Sarah Donnelly. The two spent nearly a week revalidating the process and confirming no technical mistakes. A preliminary report was sent to the Illinois Attorney General's office and the FBI. Because the individual lived in another state, the FBI was asked to assist in verifying Harold Blake's background. Public records showed he was born August 17, 1950, in Chicago Heights, Illinois, but his birth certificate was not issued until 1956, 6 years late. This caught Sarah's attention. In 1956, police had suspected the suspect truck in the Lucas Martin case originated from the Chicago Heights area. She requested the Civil Records Office to pull the original birth certificate and examine the ink, paper type, and stamp. The document was printed on a 1956 form with a stamp from a now-retired head nurse. It listed place of birth, Chicago Heights Memorial, and parents, Richard Blake, Mabel Blake, all typed. There was no reference number from an earlier record or amendment notation, unusual for legitimate certificates. Sarah suspected the document had either been recreated from an older one or issued improperly. She and Reyes continued searching federal databases for Harold's residential history. Records showed he lived in Illinois until 1965, then moved to Ohio, and settled in Florida in the early 1970s. Occupation: retired electrical engineer. Medical and tax records appeared valid, with no criminal history. To verify identity, the Cold Case Task Force contacted the commercial lab, where Harold had submitted his sample, and requested independent STR retesting of the original swab. 2 weeks later, the results came back, matching Lucas Martin's sample at 99.98%. The margin of error fell within the biological range for a parent-child relationship or identical individual. Genetically, Harold Blake was either Lucas Martin himself or the biological child of someone with Lucas's exact DNA. Sarah immediately requested a formal identity investigation and forwarded the report to FBI Chicago and the Jacksonville field office. Federal agents began re-examining the Blake family background. Richard and Mabel Blake, listed as parents, had both died in the late 1980s. No adoption records existed in any Illinois court. Civil records found no guardianship transfer paperwork or maternity records for Mabel at Chicago Heights Memorial. All documentation appeared to begin in 1956. Everything prior was blank. Sarah and Reyes hypothesized that Harold might be a child who had been re-registered after an informal adoption, but with a 99.98% match to Lucas Martin, the probability that he was the missing boy himself was extremely high. For further confirmation, they checked additional identifiers: height, blood type, congenital marks. Harold's medical file noted a small scar on his left knee, matching the exact location described by Evelyn Martin in 1951. The pieces were falling into place in an uncanny sequence. Sarah asked the tech team to run facial recognition software, comparing 6-year-old Lucas with Harold's 1970 passport photo. Facial similarity scored over 80%. She knew algorithms alone could not conclude identity, but the combination of DNA and physical markers was strong enough to justify field investigation. The task force sent a formal request to the Jacksonville FBI office for discreet verification without revealing the subject's possible true identity until an official conclusion. Their mission was to check the residence, conduct indirect neighbor and former co-worker interviews, and verify residency records, bank accounts, and travel history. Preliminary reports showed Harold Blake lived quietly in a small house in northern Jacksonville suburbs, had no criminal record, was widowed, and had no children. Neighbors described him as reserved and fond of building vintage model trains in his garage every afternoon. That detail stopped Sarah and Miguel in their tracks. The original Lucas Martin file contained a note that the boy loved collecting toy train cars, gifts his father brought home from the factory. From that point, the cold case task force began tracing the true identity of Harold Blake. They compiled every residency record, identification document, payroll stub, medical file, and old family photos of the Blakes, while coordinating with forensics to prepare for direct confirmatory DNA sampling if authorized. After more than 60 years, the Lucas Martin case finally showed its first sign of life: a man living under a different name, more than 1,000 miles from Joliet, carrying within him the exact genetic code of the child who vanished on a summer afternoon in 1951. After the DNA match was confirmed, the Springfield Cold Case Task Force opened a detailed investigation into the identity of the man known as Harold Blake. Special Agent Sarah Donnelly's team was tasked with tracing every administrative, educational, medical, and employment record from the issuance of his birth certificate in Chicago Heights in 1956 onward. They began by obtaining civil registry extracts from the Illinois State Office. Harold was recorded as the only child of Richard Blake, a transport employee, and Mabel Blake, a homemaker. School records showed Harold first enrolled at Chicago Heights Elementary in fall 1957. 1 year after the birth certificate was issued. There were no prior preschool or daycare records, and his recorded age of 6 exactly matched Lucas Martin's age at the time of disappearance. Vaccination records were entered the same year, 1957, all administered at the same suburban clinic by a physician listed as a family acquaintance. Sarah reviewed these documents and noticed numerous gaps. The boy seemed to appear out of nowhere in mid-1956, with no prior medical history, no birth record, no transfer paperwork, only the notation "first enrollment." Miguel Reyes cross-checked the Chicago Heights Memorial Hospital database for the listed birth, but found no archived delivery record for a Harold Blake in August 1950. He concluded the medical record may have been added later. The investigation expanded to tax, insurance, and employment agencies. Social Security records showed Richard Blake had worked as a driver for Anderson Materials, the same company investigated in the Lucas Martin case. In 1955, he took several weeks off for family reasons, then returned as a contract employee. By 1957, Richard moved the family to suburban Calumet City and purchased a small house paid in cash, an amount far exceeding his reported income. Police noted possible unreported income, but the statute of limitations had long expired. Regarding Mabel Blake, civil records listed her only as a homemaker, with no criminal history or registered adoption paperwork. When Sarah searched Cook County courts, she found absolutely no legal documentation confirming Harold's adoption, no guardianship petition, no welfare department certification. This meant the child had been brought into the Blake household entirely outside legal process. Investigators located surviving former neighbors in Chicago Heights. Several elderly residents recalled that in the summer of 1956, Richard Blake returned from a long trip with a small boy he introduced as an orphaned cousin were taking in. No one questioned it. Informal adoptions were common at the time. The boy kept to himself, rarely went outside, and only started school the following year. School records described Harold as intelligent and studious, especially strong in science, but shy and almost never spoke about his family. Through high school, he became more social, joined the mechanics club, and won a model train competition in 1967. After graduation, he enrolled in electrical engineering at Joliet Junior College and took a job with the local power company. That same year, the Blake family sold their house and moved to Ohio. Sarah built a timeline of moves: 1956, 1967, Chicago Heights, 1967, 1972. Dayton, Ohio, 1972. Onward, Jacksonville, Florida. The timeline matched federal tax and employment records. During review, Miguel discovered a 1967 residency transfer form in which the parents section had been crossed out by hand and rewritten in different ink, clear signs of later alteration. He sent the document for handwriting analysis. Results indicated the revisions were very likely made by Richard Blake several months after initial submission, further supporting the theory of delayed identity legalization. Sarah contacted the Florida Department of Social Services for internal migration records of the Blake family in the early 1970s. Reports showed Richard purchased a small house in suburban Jacksonville in 1971, registering only 2 adults and no dependents. In 1972, Harold applied for his own Social Security card, listing birth year 1950, birthplace Illinois, occupation electrical engineer. All documents were valid with no disputes. He later had a brief marriage to a nurse in 1978. No children, wife deceased, 1999. While examining the notarized wedding photo in public records, Sarah paused at one detail. Harold was wearing a small silver bracelet engraved with the initials LM matching Lucas Martin's initials, for which no explanation existed in any file. She flagged the image as evidence. By the end of 2014, the Cold Case Task Force completed compilation of Harold Blake's personal, medical, educational, and relocation data, establishing that he had lived continuously under that identity for nearly 6 decades with no lawful point of origin. The final report concluded, adoptive parents Richard and Mabel Blake were solely responsible for his registration and upbringing, yet no official adoption records existed. The family's migration from Illinois to Ohio to Florida coincided exactly with the withdrawal of original investigators from the Lucas Martin scene. The Harold Blake file was marked in red in the cold case catalog, with the note potential victim identity, pending confirmation, becoming the focal point of an investigation that the entire state of Illinois was now watching closely. In early 2015, after the investigative report on Harold Blake's identity was completed, an Illinois state court issued a search warrant for the remaining estate of the Blake family to locate evidence legalizing the adoption or documents related to the identity change. Sarah Donnelly, accompanied by 2 FBI agents, arrived at the small house on the outskirts of Jacksonville where Harold Blake was living. He agreed to cooperate and allowed them to examine all the belongings of his deceased adoptive parents. The attic contained dozens of old cardboard boxes, mostly filled with bills, letters, and family papers. When the forensic technician opened a locked wooden trunk, secured with a rusty latch, they discovered inside a thick brown envelope sealed with wax, bearing the handwritten inscription, "To be opened only by Harold when the truth must be known." Inside were 3 neatly folded sheets, a 2-page handwritten letter, a copy of a birth certificate in the name of Lucas Martin, and an old photograph of a blond boy standing in front of a white picket fence, the exact type of photo that had appeared in the 1951 missing person file. The letter was dated December 1985 and signed Richard Blake. It described how he had taken a boy from Joliet in the summer of 1951 while hauling freight through the Maple Lane neighborhood. He wrote that he had seen the boy standing alone by the fence, looking exactly like the son I lost to illness. In a state of panic and obsession, he stopped the truck, spoke to the child, and impulsively took him, initially intending to care for him for a few days, but later, not daring to return. He stated that his wife, Mabel, learned of it afterward, and agreed to keep the boy because they both believed God had given us a second chance. Richard admitted to asking an acquaintance at Chicago Heights Hospital to create a new birth certificate, changing the name to Harold Blake to legalize the adoption. The final paragraph read, "If you are reading this letter, know that I never meant to harm anyone. I only wanted back the family that war and fate had taken from me. I beg forgiveness from that child's parents, even though they will never hear it." The letter was written in black ink on yellowed paper, in slanted, steady handwriting. Sarah prepared the seizure report, sealed the documents, and forwarded them to the FBI Handwriting Analysis Lab. At the same time, the original copy of the birth certificate, bearing the name Lucas Martin, was compared with the copy preserved in the Joliet Police Department's files. The serial numbers matched, and the faint stamp was still legible. Issued June 1950, Cook County. This was the original document that had never been made public, proving that a birth certificate for Lucas existed alongside the one for Harold. The handwriting lab confirmed that the writing in the letter matched Richard Blake's signature on old bank documents and employment contracts with a certainty exceeding 97%. The paper was analyzed for cellulose composition and ink via spectrometry. Results dated it to 1980, 1986, consistent with the date on the letter. No signs of forgery were found. Sarah reread the contents. Every sentence radiated remorse and guilt rather than excuses. She photocopied each page and filed the evidence under Code Exhibit RB01. Miguel Reyes examined the accompanying photograph, using image processing software to compare it with the photo of Lucas in the missing person file. The match was nearly perfect, same posture, same fence in the background, differing only in lighting and angle. This confirmed that Richard Blake had once possessed the original photograph of Lucas, possibly obtained from the Martin family or copied from contemporary news reports. When the search concluded, the evidence was sealed in 2 separate bags, signed by the 3 investigators, and flown back to Illinois. The subsequent comprehensive forensic report concluded Richard Blake's handwritten letter was authentic, composed around the time of his death. Its contents contained a direct confession of taking a boy from Joliet and falsifying identity documents. The original copy of Lucas Martin's birth certificate and the accompanying photograph confirmed the connection between the Blake family and the 1951 missing child. These documents were regarded as the first physical evidence proving kidnapping and identity alteration, closing more than 6 decades of suspicion without concrete proof. Sarah Donnelly signed the final page of the report, marking the line "Verified Confession Document, Richard Blake," then carefully placed the file in the special section of the Cold Case Task Force, where the final evidence capable of changing the entire direction of the Lucas Martin investigation was stored. After verifying the authenticity of the letter left by Richard Blake, the Cold Case Task Force expanded the investigation into the origin of the administrative documents mentioned in the letter, particularly the new birth certificate that Blake claimed he had obtained through an acquaintance at Chicago Heights Memorial Hospital. Sarah Donnelly, working with the FBI's Chicago field office, served subpoenas to review the hospital's complete birth registry logs from 1949 to 1957. The paper records were stored in an underground vault, mostly faded, many pages stained with ink or torn at the edges, but still legible. The examiners discovered an anomaly in 1956, 3 birth records with duplicate serial numbers and identical typewriter characteristics, all signed by nurse supervisor L. Hargrove. That name matched the signatory on Harold Blake's birth certificate. Sarah requested the hospital's personnel files and discovered a head nurse named Lorraine Hargrove, who had worked in maternity from 1949 to 1958 before retiring and moving to Florida. Administrative records showed she was responsible for managing birth certificate forms and submitting them to the Cook County Vital Records Office. Initial investigation revealed that between 1954 and 1957, 6 birth certificates had been reissued without corresponding delivery records, 3 of which were linked to alleged private adoptions. Sarah and FBI Special Agent Walter Cray flew to Chicago Heights to examine the ledgers. Every entry was checked under ultraviolet light for signs of erasure. On the record dated July 10, 1956, sandwiched between 2 normal entries, there was a blank space with a new sheet pasted over it, typed in a different style. This was Harold Blake's birth record. Beneath the overlay, the original name that had been cut away was faintly visible. Lou and Ma could still be read, matching Lucas Martin. The discovery was immediately photographed under legal protocol and sealed as evidence. Simultaneously, the FBI reviewed 2 other cases from the same hospital during that period. A baby girl and a baby boy, both issued late birth certificates signed by L. Hargrove, with adoptive parents lacking legal paperwork. Both were later found to be orphan children, placed privately. The team concluded that Hargrove had abused her authority to sign and issue new birth certificates to couples wishing to adopt outside the welfare system, possibly in exchange for money or personal motives. When the FBI located Lorraine Hargrove's last known address, they learned she had died in 1992, but some personal papers remained with her daughter. Among them was an old medical notebook listing individuals she had assisted with paperwork, including the entry Art Blake, 1956, Chicago Heights. Sarah compared the handwriting and confirmed a perfect match with the signature on Harold Blake's birth certificate. This was direct evidence that Lorraine Hargrove had acted as the intermediary who helped Richard Blake forge documents to legitimize raising the child, known as Lucas Martin. A detailed report was sent to the FBI Chicago office, recommending expansion of the investigation statewide to identify similar cases. The regional FBI director approved and formed a small task force codenamed Operation Heights, focused on irregular medical and birth records from the 1950s. Within 3 months, they uncovered 2 additional cases with identical patterns. Missing children issued new birth certificates at the same hospital, same signer, same typewriter. Specific victim identities were not yet established, but the data pattern ruled out coincidence. The FBI concluded that a small ring likely existed within the hospital, run by Hargrove, that trafficked or legalized children of unknown origin. The findings were released internally, identifying the Harold Blake, Lucas Martin case as the first link proven with physical evidence. Sarah Donnelly and Miguel Reyes completed a nearly 200-page report detailing the birth certificate forgery process. Medical staff signed blank certificates, removed originals, replaced them with new forms bearing different names, then forwarded them to Vital Records for legal registration. The report concluded, irregularities in Chicago Heights birth records from the 1950s are real, and direct evidence shows at least one missing child was re-registered under a new identity through manipulation by medical personnel. The Lucas Martin case was officially elevated to federal priority status and moved into an expanded investigation phase regarding child trafficking within the Illinois healthcare system during the 1950s, marking a major turning point after nearly 60 years buried in silence. After the FBI investigation into the forged records at Chicago Heights concluded, The next step assigned to the Springfield Cold Case Task Force was biological verification of Harold Blake's identity to officially confirm whether he was Lucas Martin. To complete the process, DNA samples from direct Martin family relatives were required. Sarah Donnelly and technician Miguel Reyes began searching for surviving relatives. Lucas's parents had both died in the 1970s, but civil records showed the boy had a younger sister named Anna Martin, born in 1947. Old data only indicated the family had moved to Springfield in 1958 before losing contact. Sarah contacted the Missouri State Resident Archive, which listed a woman named Anna L. Martin receiving retirement benefits in Columbia, Missouri. Cross-checking birth dates and former addresses confirmed this was Lucas's sister. Now 70 years old and living with her son, she agreed to cooperate when told her brother's disappearance might finally be solved. The team sent a formal letter of invitation with a detailed explanation of the genetic testing procedure. 1 week later, the forensic team visited Anna's home, collected buccal swabs and hair samples, and sealed them in the presence of an Illinois Department of Justice representative. At the same time, Harold Blake in Florida agreed to provide a comparison sample, though he had not yet been told the full story. He was only informed that a scientific verification of his birth records was needed. Both samples were sent to the Springfield Forensic Lab, coded separately for confidentiality. Only Reyes knew the matching key. Analysis took 10 days. When the results appeared on the screen, the entire team fell silent. The DNA profiles showed a 99.998% match across 23 genetic loci, conclusive for full siblings. Reyes printed the report, signed it, and forwarded it to the FBI office. From that moment, Harold Blake's legal identity was established. He was Lucas Martin, the boy who disappeared from Joliet in 1951. A summary of the results, along with all supporting documentation, including raw STR profiles, genealogical records, and an independent federal lab verification, was sent to the Cold Case Task Force. Sarah read the report, feeling as though she held the ending to a story generations of investigators had pursued. In the conclusion she wrote, "Genetic analysis confirms not only scientific truth, but a human history that was interrupted. Harold Blake and Lucas Martin are the same person." Once the results were approved, the task force began preparing the official notification plan for the families. Due to psychological and media considerations, every step had to be handled carefully. They brought in a counseling psychologist and drafted disclosure scripts, one for the relatives, Anna Martin, and one for the press after the family had been informed. Sarah flew to Missouri to meet Anna in person. The meeting took RB in a quiet room at the Columbia Police Station. On the table lay a copy of Richard Blake's letter, the old photo of Lucas, and the DNA report. Anna sat in silence for a long time as Sarah read the conclusion, her hands trembling when she touched the photograph. She whispered, "I dreamed about my brother many times, but I never thought he was still alive." Sarah only nodded, saying nothing more. After receiving written confirmation, the Martin family formally consented to public release of the results under Illinois privacy laws. At this point, the Cold Case Task Force entered the post-confirmation phase, planning the reunion of the two sides while preparing a comprehensive report for the U.S. Department of Justice, marking the Lucas Martin case as the first in state history fully resolved through genealogical DNA technology. In the ColdNet database, file IL-MIS 447 status was updated from cold case DNA index to identified, confirmed match. That status line closed more than 6 decades of fruitless searching and opened the preparation for the official notification to the person the entire country once believed had vanished on a summer afternoon in 1951. On May 22, 2015, the Illinois State Police held an official press conference at their Springfield headquarters to announce the resolution of the Lucas Martin disappearance after 59 years. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and representatives from federal agencies. In the front row, a white board read Case IL-MIS 447, Resolved, 1951. 2010s. Special Agent Sarah Donnelly and technician Miguel Reyes, the lead investigators, stood beside the cold case task force director. As the cameras rolled, the spokesperson's voice rang out steadily. After nearly 6 decades, the disappearance of 6-year-old Lucas Martin in Joliet in 1951 has been verified. Through genealogical DNA technology, we have determined that Harold Blake of Florida is the victim in the file. The room fell silent for several seconds before camera shutters erupted. Sarah read a summary of the investigation, from the discovery of old records and DNA recovery to comparison with commercial databases. When she mentioned the 99.998% match with the surviving younger sister, many in the room lowered their heads. The full report was posted on the Illinois Department of Justice website that same night. Major outlets, Associated Press, CBS, Chicago Tribune, ran stories about the longest-running Illinois case solved by DNA. The news spread nationwide, replayed on evening broadcasts alongside economic and political segments. In Joliet, where the name Lucas Martin had gathered dust, local papers reprinted the old photo with the headline, "Found Alive." After 59 years, older residents reminisced about the afternoon the boy vanished. In the cold case office, phones rang nonstop. People claiming to be former classmates of Lucas, old neighbors of the Martins, or simply well-wishers called in. Sarah and Reyes spent hours verifying identities and collecting information for the upcoming reunion phase. The Department of Justice Public Affairs Office, working with Missouri police, contacted the remaining Martin family. Anna Martin was asked to choose a safe, private location for the first meeting with her brother. Due to her health and the case's sensitivity, everything was kept confidential. Media were allowed to report only after the reunion occurred. Meanwhile, Harold Blake, now fully aware of his origins, cooperated and signed permission to use his true name in investigative records. He received the news quietly and asked Sarah only one short question. "Did my mother know?" She replied that Evelyn Martin had passed away long ago, but had always kept his photo close. On June 14th, the Department of Justice held a second, smaller press conference to update the public on reunion plans. Sarah spoke briefly, emphasizing that the case was not only a forensic achievement, but proof of the value of memory and perseverance. When asked about Harold's reaction, she simply said, "He needs time." News of the impending reunion spread across the country, appearing on NBC's morning show and in major investigative magazines. Long-form articles retraced the entire journey from 1951, quoting former investigators. Even Reddick, long retired, sent congratulations. The retired detective said in a short phone interview, "I always believed the kid was out there somewhere. Now I know I wasn't wrong." At the same time, forensic agencies held symposia on the Lucas Martin case as a model for reviving cold cases through genealogical DNA. Sarah and Reyes were invited to speak, sharing the analysis process and coordination between commercial data and law enforcement. Their report was archived in the federal system as a new investigative standard. In Missouri, Anna received hundreds of letters of support from strangers and other families with missing children. She told a local reporter, "If I could say anything to those still waiting, it would be never stop believing." Dozens of investigative units from other states requested Illinois' procedures. Public focus shifted from the technology to the human element. A boy presumed dead was alive. A shattered family was being mended. By the end of June, the official reunion plan between Harold Blake, Lucas Martin, and his relatives was finalized. The location chosen was the Cold Case Task Force headquarters in Springfield, where everything had begun anew. The team prepared a small conference room and hung the old photo of the boy in front of the white fence. Sarah looked at the picture one last time before leaving the room, knowing the moment about to unfold would be not only the end of a case, but the final chapter of a 60-year journey that generations of police, scientists, and survivors had walked to return a real name to a child the world had once forgotten. In July 2015, nearly 6 decades after leaving Joliet under the identity of someone else, Lucas Martin, the true birth name of Harold Blake, returned to Illinois with members of the Cold Case Task Force. The trip was organized quietly, without media, accompanied only by Sarah Donnelly, Miguel Reyes, 2 FBI agents, and the state forensic representative. When the convoy reached the outskirts of Joliet, the sky was overcast gray, and the rows of elm trees along Maple Lane still stood, even though the neighborhood had changed. The small white-painted house of the Martin family now belonged to someone else, but it still retained the low wooden fence and the old brick walkway. Lucas stood silently for a long time at the gate, his hand trembling slightly as it touched the weathered wood, as if searching for a feeling from a distant memory. Sarah asked the forensic team to reconstruct the crime scene diagram based on the 1951 map. They pulled out old photographs, comparing the position of the fence, the corner of the park, and the direction of the afternoon sunlight that witness Anna had once described. Lucas was invited to participate as a living witness. He recounted the fragmented memories he still retained. The sound of the truck, the smell of engine oil, the whistling of the wind through the trees. When cross-referenced with the 1951 report, the details matched astonishingly. The distance from the porch to the fence was almost exact, and the position where the vehicle was parked aligned with the angle Anna had described in her initial statement. Reyes used a 3D scanner to record the entire area, overlaying the new data onto the old map to demonstrate accuracy. Afterward, the group moved to the small park at the head of the street, where the child's shoe had once been discovered. That area had now become a parking lot for a convenience store, but the old ground level still showed a noticeable elevation difference. Lucas spoke softly, as if to himself. "I remember there was a blue sign over there in the corner, and a dog barking when the truck stopped." Sarah took notes, then opened the 1951 photograph map. Exactly at the spot he pointed to, a note indicated a residence with a large dog. The more they listened, the more the investigators realized that his memories, though faint, contained reliable matching points. The team continued along State Route 53, heading south, the route that suspect Richard Blake had mentioned in his letter as the one he took when taking the boy from Joliet. Lucas sat quietly in the vehicle, his eyes following the view through the window, occasionally asking to stop at a curve or intersection. At each place he indicated, Reyes compared it with the travel map drawn by Detective Reddick in 1951. Most stopping points matched in distance and direction of travel. When they reached the banks of the Des Plaines River, Lucas got out, standing and gazing at the water sparkling under the summer sun. He said he remembered this reflected light, where the truck stopped for the first time. Sarah had the location marked, GPS coordinates measured, and added to the comparison file. The survey lasted 3 full days. Every location mentioned in the accounts was verified. Every small detail, the fence, the factory corner, the road signs, was photographed again. The analysis results showed that more than 80% of the data in Lucas's memories matched the scene and original documents, proving that those memories were not suggested but real experiences from childhood. When the team returned to Springfield, all the data was entered into the ColdNet system and assembled into a 3D simulation recreating the 1951 disappearance journey, the first time it included the victim himself. The comprehensive report, over 300 pages long, included reconstructed maps, satellite images, DNA results, statements, and copies of the physical evidence from Richard Blake's letter. The final section was the victim identity confirmation record, which stated clearly, based on genetic data, physical evidence, confession and scene comparison, it is confirmed that Harold Blake is Lucas Martin, the victim who went missing in Joliet on June 23, 1951. The report was sent to the Illinois Department of Justice, FBI Chicago, and the governor's office. Sarah signed the last line, closing the identity investigation phase, while Lucas sat silently in the room, looking at the photograph of the blond boy hanging on the wall. After 64 years, he had finally returned to the place where he disappeared, standing on the same piece of land, no longer a victim in the files, but a witness to his own life story. On August 2, 2015, at the Cold Case Task Force headquarters in Springfield, the official reunion between Lucas Martin and his sister Anna was held in a solemn yet quiet atmosphere. The meeting room was arranged simply. On the table were 2 DNA reports, an old framed photo of the 2 siblings taken in 1950, and a nameplate reading Lucas Martin. Missing child case 447 M51. Sarah Donnelly and technician Miguel Reyes stood at the back of the room, overseeing every procedural step. Anna Martin entered first, walking slowly with a cane, her eyes lingering on the photograph before turning toward the man waiting on the other side. Lucas, in a gray suit, clasped his hands tightly, head slightly bowed, as if afraid to shatter the fragile atmosphere. When they saw each other, the entire room fell completely silent. Anna walked forward, stopped a few steps away, then reached out and gently touched his cheek. She said nothing, except 2 trembling words, "Big brother." Lucas pressed his lips together, eyes moist, and softly replied, "I remember you, even if I don't know why." In that moment, all the years of loss seemed to condense into a single breath. Sarah stepped forward and handed them the final comparative DNA test result, confirming an absolute 99.999% match between Lucas and Anna, ending all legal doubts. The certificate was signed by the director of the Illinois State Forensic Laboratory, officially affirming his identity as Lucas Martin, the person reported missing on June 23, 1951. No press was invited, only representatives from the Department of Justice, the FBI, and 2 social workers were present as witnesses. When Lucas put pen to the first page of the missing child, found alive record, his hand trembled slightly, the blue ink wavered, but his signature remained firm. Anna signed below, then turned and embraced him. They held each other like that for a long time. Sarah left the room for a few minutes to give them private space. In those silent minutes, the siblings only spoke of simple things, the childhood one remembered, and the other did not. Their parents who had passed away, the only remaining photograph that Evelyn had kept in her wallet. Lucas said he did not clearly remember the moment he was taken, only fragments, the sound of the engine, the smell of iron smoke, a man's voice saying everything will be okay. He grew up in the Blake family, never knowing who he really was. When he read Richard Blake's letter, he said it felt like reading a diary that wasn't mine, yet every line was about me. Anna listened, tears falling without wiping them away, then said that just knowing he was alive was enough. After the signing, a small reunion ceremony was held right in the police headquarters courtyard. Local officers brought a sign reading, "Lucas Martin, case closed," and placed it in front of the wooden podium. The Cold Case Task Force director read the statement. After 59 years, the state of Illinois officially closes missing person case 447 M51. Victim Lucas Martin is confirmed alive and returned to his birth family. The applause was low and brief. No one cheered, only the sound of release after decades of waiting. Miguel handed Lucas a digitized copy of the entire case file, recording the full investigation journey from 1951 to 2015. Lucas held the thick folder, looking at the bold text on the cover, "Cold Case, Resolved." He said softly, "I am the last line of this file." Sarah nodded and replied quietly, "And the answer for all of us." By afternoon, when everyone left the headquarters, only the 2 siblings remained sitting on the porch, sunlight slanting through the trees. Anna told him that their mother Evelyn, in her final years, still lit a candle on his every birthday, always believing her son was not dead. She kept Lucas's room exactly as it was, the red shirt still on the bed. Hearing that, Lucas took from his pocket the silver bracelet engraved LM that he had worn since his teenage years. The only item left from a past whose origin he never understood. Anna recognized it immediately. That was the birthday gift Mom gave you in 1951. They sat in silence together, only the sound of crickets somewhere in the grass behind them. As dusk fell, the investigation team returned one last time to complete the file handover procedures. Sarah gave Lucas the official certificate, the original closing document bearing the words, "Missing child, found alive. Case closed, State of Illinois." He signed it, then handed it back to her. In the internal file, the case status was updated, Resolved 2015. Lucas Martin, located alive. No criminal proceedings due to statute limitations. That simple line contained 64 years of waiting, generations of investigators, and a family that never stopped hoping. That evening, before leaving Springfield, Lucas, Anna, and the cold case team stood in front of the board commemorating solved cases. Sarah pasted a black and white photo of the 6-year-old boy beneath the words, Lucas Martin, found 2015. The light reflected off the picture. The boy's face smiled brightly, as if time had never passed. When everyone left, Lucas turned back for one last look and said softly, I traveled very far to come back and be myself. In the room where the file had just been closed, dim light fell over the final stack of documents. Proof that sometimes the miracle is not in finding the answer, but in having people who persist in searching all the way to the truth. After the reunion, the cold case task force moved into the post-investigation phase, aiming to determine legal responsibility of individuals who had participated in or assisted Richard Blake in creating false documents for Lucas Martin in 1956. Sarah Donnelly coordinated with the FBI Chicago office to compile a list of 14 people directly or indirectly involved, including staff from Chicago Heights Memorial Hospital Administration, Cook County civil officials, and the intermediary who signed the fake birth certificate, nurse Lorraine Hargrove. However, upon actual verification, more than half were deceased, and the surviving ones were over 80 with fading memories. Most hospital archive records had been lost in a 1989 warehouse fire, making it nearly impossible to trace evidence backward. The FBI conducted a review of Richard Blake's old financial and correspondence records to search for any payments related to document fabrication, but bank documents had also passed their retention period. Sarah submitted a report to the state prosecutor recommending evaluation of criminal prosecution feasibility, but the Illinois Department of Justice concluded that all illegal acts had exceeded the statute of limitations and key individuals were deceased. So the matter could only be recorded as a historical administrative violation. Nevertheless, the investigation team continued to complete the file as a legal case study. Miguel Reyes focused on comparing Lorraine Hargrove's signature samples with 3 other irregular birth registrations, proving the same typing pattern and identical administrative paper stock. This report was sent to the State Department of Health, leading the Illinois government to launch a comprehensive review of all birth records from the 1950s to detect similar irregularities. While legal agencies finalized the file closure procedures, Lucas, now officially restored to his true identity, agreed to cooperate with investigators as a special advisor. He provided information, recollections, and assisted in interviewing surviving witnesses who might know about the child-swapping rings of that era. Lucas and Sarah returned to Chicago Heights once more, visiting the hospital where his name had once been falsely recorded. He stood in front of the newly built lobby, pointed to the memorial plaque for former staff that listed Lorraine Hargrove's name, and said, I don't want anyone else to disappear the way I did. His words became motivation for the team to review similar missing person cases in neighboring states. Under FBI guidance, the Cold Case Task Force collected 18 files with matching patterns. Missing children issued late birth certificates bearing the same signatures or paper types. Lucas helped interview the families and encouraged them to submit DNA samples to the national database. During those sessions, he often sat quietly taking notes and asked only one question: did they ever believe their child was still alive? Those meetings made the entire team realize that the Lucas Martin case was not just the closure of one file, but the beginning of numerous unanswered questions in the history of the American health and administrative systems. The Cold Case Task Force submitted the post-investigation summary report to the Illinois Department of Justice, over 400 pages long, including forensic analysis, personnel verification, and recommendations to establish a unified database for pre-1960 child identity swap cases. The report concluded, criminal responsibility cannot be pursued due to statute of limitations and the death of involved personnel. But the investigation results reveal the systematic existence of fake document issuance in small industrial area Chicago hospitals in the post-war period. A copy of the report was archived in the Lucas Martin file as the final appendix. On the day it was completed, Sarah sent an email to the entire team with a short line. "We cannot prosecute the dead, but we can record the truth so the living understand why it happened." Lucas read the report in silence, then signed the witness confirmation section, officially closing the post-investigation process. On the last page, he added a handwritten line, "Don't let another child lose their name just because adults needed to fill an emptiness." In February 2016, nearly a year after the post-investigation report was completed, the Illinois Supreme Court issued an official ruling confirming that all acts related to the kidnapping and document forgery in the Lucas Martin case had passed the statute of limitations for prosecution. The decision was announced in a closed session attended by representatives from the Department of Justice, the Cold Case Task Force, and the Martin family's attorney. The Chief Justice read the brief ruling. "Since the involved individuals are deceased and the legal statute of limitations has expired, the case will be classified as historical records with no remaining criminal procedural value, but it will retain status as legal and scientific evidence." Sarah Donnelly sat in the back row, writing the final lines in her notebook next to case status, closed by statute limitation. After the session, all documents were transferred to the Central Archive of the Illinois Department of Justice in Springfield. The physical evidence, the silver bracelet, the confession letter, birth certificate, and scene maps, was placed in a specialized metal box, sealed with a QR code, and stored permanently in a temperature-controlled vault, alongside other notable closed cases. The electronic Lucas Martin file was backed up in 3 copies, one for the ColdNet system, one for the FBI federal database, and one for the Illinois State Forensic Bureau for research and training purposes. In March of that year, the Forensic Bureau held a professional conference in Chicago, using the Lucas Martin case as a model for combining genealogical DNA technology with commercial data. The presentation detailed the process of handling old evidence, recovering genetic samples from items over half a century old, and standards for preserving evidence in similar cases. Sarah and Miguel Reyes were invited to speak. They described the recovery process in detail, from hair sample extraction, STR analysis, CODIS matching, to expanded genealogical comparison. The presentation ended with prolonged applause, and immediately afterward, the Department of Justice decided to include Case 447M51, Lucas Martin, in the official training curriculum for new investigators in the National Cold Case Program. In subsequent classes, this case was regarded as proof that DNA technology is not only for catching criminals, but also for restoring identity to the forgotten. At the same time, FBI Chicago continued maintaining a subsidiary investigation branch, an open line for missing person or identity swap cases with similar patterns in northern Illinois industrial areas. The data Lucas had helped provide was integrated into the system for comparison with unresolved files. Sarah was appointed permanent advisor to this unit, responsible for validating old DNA cases. Miguel Reyes moved to teaching at the State Forensic Academy, using the Lucas Martin case as the opening lesson for the course Evidence Never Dies. On the family side, Anna Martin received copies of the court ruling and the legal identity certificate for her brother. Lucas, now officially using his real name again, signed the final record, confirming consent for state agencies to retain his full DNA data for research purposes. He said, in an internal interview, "I am a person who was found, but I am also proof that human memory can be verified by science." On April 3rd, the Department of Justice released an internal bulletin, Case 447M51, Lucas Martin. Legal proceedings concluded. Evidence archived for historical preservation. Subcase investigation open. The final sentence in the report was the official directive. No further legal activity but the subsidiary file remains open for scientific and statistical purposes. In the Springfield archive, the metal evidence box was placed in row 3, slot number 47, beside other famous cases. On the label, laser-etched in bold letters, Lucas Martin, found alive, 1951, 2015. When Sarah saw it for the last time before leaving her post, she lightly touched the cold edge of the box and whispered, "We went all the way to the end." The fluorescent light reflected off the steel, creating a long streak of light, like a period at the end of 60 years of a case that had once been only a number in an old file drawer. The Lucas Martin case was officially closed, but the subsidiary investigation remained open, like a door not yet fully shut, left for the other children who have not yet returned to their real names. After the Lucas Martin case was officially closed, its impact spread far beyond the borders of Illinois. The scientific and legal reports from the Cold Case Task Force were quickly shared with the United States Department of Justice and became a key reference document in modernizing the National Missing Persons Database. In June 2016, the FBI, in coordination with the National Forensic Science Institute, announced a plan to expand the National Missing DNA Registry, incorporating missing persons cases from before 1980 into the genetic matching system. The Lucas Martin case was specifically cited as proof of the value of genealogical DNA data and the ability to resurrect seemingly hopeless investigation. Within a single year, 22 other states launched programs to re-examine old missing persons files, prioritizing cases where physical evidence was still viable for testing. Local forensic laboratories began training personnel according to the Lucas Protocol, a set of procedures compiled by the Illinois Bureau of Forensic Services based on the ancient sample recovery and genealogical verification methods applied in the case. Major newspapers called this the Lucas Martin effect, describing the positive ripple effect from one single case that forced the entire national investigative system to change its approach. In just 2 years, more than 30 missing persons cases from the 1950s, 1970s were reopened across the United States, most of them thanks to the expanded use of genetic genealogy techniques. Some cases successfully identified the victims, others were still in the data comparison phase. The Department of Justice issued new guidelines requiring every state to preserve evidence samples for at least 75 years and permitting automatic connection to commercial genealogical databases with family consent. At national conferences, the name Lucas Martin was always mentioned first when discussing the restoration of justice in cold cases. PBS produced a multi-part documentary titled The Boy Who Returned, recounting the 6-decade investigative journey and its influence on American forensic science. Lucas, now in his 60s, appeared in the film as both a witness and an advisor to a cold case victim support program. He joined Second Voice, a community project sponsored by the Department of Justice that provides psychological support and social reintegration assistance to former victims and families of cold cases. During gatherings, Lucas often shared his story to encourage other families still searching for loved ones. "I lost my name for 59 years, but they still found me because someone never stopped looking." Many law and forensic science students sought him out for research and to record his testimony for courses on genetic identification. Sarah Donnelly, now appointed director of the National Cold Case Program, invited Lucas to serve as an honorary advisor to the National Missing Initiative. Together, they traveled to numerous states, meeting young investigators, speaking about perseverance, the value of every tiny piece of evidence, and the human responsibility to honor other people's memories. In 2018, the United States Congress passed legislation expanding funding for the National DNA Database. Section 12 of the bill was named the Lucas Martin Provision, allowing a portion of federal funds to be used for genealogical analysis of long-term missing persons cases. That provision was signed into law by the President with the statement, "One child found after nearly 6 decades has shown us that justice never expires." From that point on, Lucas Martin's story became foundational curriculum in forensic investigation training at police academies across the country. He continued to serve as an advisor to the Illinois Cold Case Task Force and returned to Springfield every year to speak with new investigators. In the archives, The metal box bearing his name remained in its original place, next to newly opened cases. Each time he visited, Lucas would place his hand on it and whisper, as a reminder, "This isn't an ending, it's where everything begins." The influence of the case extended far beyond technology or legislation. It became a symbol of human perseverance in the pursuit of truth, no matter how many years had passed. In December 2016, the Illinois Department of Justice released the final comprehensive report on the Lucas Martin case, confirming and publicly announcing his legal identity as the first case in state history to have identity fully restored solely through genealogical DNA technology. The report, more than 400 pages long, compiled the entire investigative process from the rediscovery of the old file, evidence recovery, genetic tracing, legal verification, to family reunification. In the introduction, the head of the Cold Case Task Force wrote, "The Lucas Martin case stands as proof of the power of science and human perseverance when justice is defined not only by the courts, but by returning a real name to a child lost in our collective memory." The case file was officially archived under the category Historic DNA Collaboration Model and became a model document for forensic investigation training programs in other states. At the public release ceremony, Sarah Donnelly and Miguel Reyes received commendations from the governor for their outstanding contribution in applying modern genetic technology to resolve cold cases. Beside them stood Lucas Martin, wearing a black suit and a small pin engraved "Found 2015, quietly gazing at the old photograph of himself hanging on the honor wall. He was presented with the certificate restoring his legal identity, along with the decision reinstating all civil rights under his birth name. The state's civil registry completed the name change procedures, reissued documents, and updated Social Security records under the name Lucas Martin, completely replacing all paperwork ever issued under Harold Blake. The Martin family reunion ceremony was held privately in Springfield, witnessed by representatives of the Department of Justice. Anna Martin received the decision restoring legal sibling blood relation with her brother, and became the sole heir to all assets and rights arising from the case. In her brief remarks, she said, "My brother's name has finally been returned to its rightful place, not just on paper, but in our history." Lucas replied simply, "I only wish Mom could have seen this day." After the ceremony, the case file was transferred to the Federal Archive in Quantico, where the nation's landmark DNA cases are stored. The Federal Forensic Lab copied Lucas's genetic data into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System NamUs under the category Recovered, Identified. Assigned Identifier NMUS-IL 447. The digital copy, including photographs, crime scene maps, and all forensic results, was uploaded to the public database for research purposes. At the 2017 National Forensic Conference, the Lucas Martin case was presented as a successful model of DNA collaboration between government agencies, private laboratories, and commercial data. Scientific papers cited the hair sample extraction method developed by Reyes, calling it the Lucas Extraction Protocol. Sarah, in her closing keynote, said what made the case special was not only finding a person still alive, but the way science and human faith met across two ends of time. Starting in 2017, every new student at the Illinois State Forensic Academy studied a dedicated module titled The Lucas Martin Case Study, which ends with a note written by Lucas himself, "I'm not a miracle, I'm the result of someone who refused to stop." After completing reunification procedures, the Martin family established the Lucas Foundation to support the search and identification of long-term missing persons in coordination with the Department of Justice's National Missing Initiative. The foundation funds ancient DNA research projects and training for young technicians. Lucas serves in an honorary role on the board and regularly returns to Joliet for missing persons memorial events. The old family home was restored and turned into a small memorial site. A plaque in the front yard reads, "Lucas Martin, missing 1951, found 2015." Every year, police cadets and forensic students visit to learn the final lesson: no case is truly closed until the truth is called by its rightful name. In the NamUs archive, File IL 447 ends with the standard note, "Case closed. Individual located alive. Identity verified." But beneath it, the system includes a rare additional comment entered by the NamUs director herself. "This record represents not an ending, but a legacy." That is the legacy of the Lucas Martin case, a legacy of science, of memory, and of the belief that justice may be slow, but it never stops. The story of Lucas Martin, the boy who disappeared in 1951 and was found alive after 59 years, is not just a solved investigation. It is a profound reflection of the core values of today's American society: faith in justice, the power of science, and the healing capacity of community. The perseverance of people like Sarah Donnelly and Miguel Reyes, investigators who refused to give up even when a case had been cold for decades, demonstrates that in a society that respects facts and transparency, truth can be restored, even when it seemed forever lost. In today's America, where genealogical DNA technology has already resolved hundreds of missing persons cases, Lucas's story reminds us that technology does not replace people. It only reaches its full potential when guided by compassion and dedication. The way the Cold Case Task Force combined government data with private sector resources also offers a lesson in trust and cross-sector collaboration, something modern Americans can apply in every field, from medicine and education to cybersecurity. Lucas, who lived half a century under the false name Harold Blake, also illustrates the importance of identity and personal truth. In an era when digital identity, personal records, and genetic information are increasingly digitized, protecting and authenticating identity is the foundation of citizenship. Finally, when Lucas chose to become an advisor to other cold case victims, he transformed his own tragedy into a mission to help others reclaim their real names, reminding us that the past should not be buried, but revisited so we can protect future generations. The lesson for American society today is this: justice is not only punishment, it is the human ability to stand up and restore meaning to things that seemed lost forever. If you believe every untold story deserves to see the light again, just like Lucas Martin's, please hit subscribe so we can continue this journey of uncovering truth in forgotten cases together. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video, where we'll keep witnessing the power of time, memory, and justice.